I vanished that morning, without a sound, without notice, without goodbye. The streets were empty as I walked alone, thinking about everything I had ever lost and everything I had ever been. The phone rang in the living room, but I did not. Answered the messages piled up in the inbox, and I ignored the knocks at the door. Because people never understand why someone leaves. I had no plan, but somehow my absence was enough to convince them. I left the apartment the way I always leave rooms. Silent and untouched, like ghosts, linger in corners and memories hide behind walls. No one saw me enter the cab. No one noticed the empty seat. No one realized a life was slipping quietly into shadow. I traveled through streets that seemed familiar and unfamiliar. At the same time, lights reflected on puddles, making everything seem distorted and false. I thought about the people who would search for me, who would call and worry, who would demand answers, and I laughed quietly. Because the truth is, no one really looks for what they cannot accept. The world kept turning, and I was invisible. Days later, news arrived that my body had been found, enough fragments to satisfy the law, enough to satisfy their grief, enough to build a coffin and organize a ceremony. They prepared flowers. They prepared speeches. They prepared memories that were fabricated from assumptions. I watched from a distance as invitations were sent, as chairs were arranged, as people rehearsed sorrow. Some smiled quietly in relief. Some whispered secrets to one another that they would not dare speak in life, only in death. I realized how fragile the truth is, how easily it can be replaced by hope and convenience. The coffin arrived, and I followed silently, unseen, unnoticed, a shadow among shadows. They placed flowers on the wood. They folded hands. They bowed heads. They wept. I wanted to cry too, but not for the same reason. I wanted to cry because the life they mourned was not mine. I stood at the back of the church, blending into the crowd, pretending to be someone else. Everyone spoke freely, because they assumed I was gone. My wife whispered to a friend, relief and exhaustion in her voice. My brother spoke without care about how light life would be. A colleague laughed about opportunities suddenly available. A neighbor praised how quiet everything would become. Every word cut deeper than death could have. Every laugh pierced the hollow I had carried for years. I realized the truth about life. People do not miss people. They miss roles. They miss obligations. They miss expectations. And when the role ends, the attachment dissolves, leaving only relief. I listened quietly. I observed the relief hidden behind smiles, the hidden satisfaction, the secret joy. I saw what I had never noticed in life. That absence reveals what presence hides. I felt anger, not for myself, but for the honesty of the world. That some things are only revealed when it is too late. I began to notice subtle gestures, the lowering of eyes, the stiff posture, the fleeting hesitation. All signs people hide when they think someone is watching. I realized I was the only one watching, alive, silent, unnoticed, and yet every heartbeat I had was louder than the prayers. I thought about stepping forward, revealing myself, watching panic replace relief, witnessing chaos unfold. But the truth is heavier than absence. The revelation would destroy more than heal. I looked at the coffin. I looked at the flowers. I looked at the faces of those who believed they were honoring me. And I understood. Freedom does not come from living. Freedom comes from knowing the truth and staying silent. I walked out quietly, blending into the shadows, leaving them to their relief, leaving them to their lies, leaving them to the version of me they believed. I became invisible willingly, because I had finally learned the weight of presence, because I had finally learned the cost of truth. Weeks passed. Life continued for everyone else. They believed I was gone. They rearranged their lives. They whispered about inheritance. They laughed about opportunity. And I survived. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I had survived the funeral and all that it revealed. I wandered through cities. I stayed in cheap hotels. I avoided people I once knew. I lived among strangers who would never guess my story. Sometimes I imagined returning, standing in the middle of a room, watching panic spread, watching relief turn to shock. But I never did. Some truths are meant to exist only in shadows. Some presences are too dangerous to reveal. And some people must learn the value of absence before they can understand the meaning of life. I finally accepted that the man they buried was not dead. He had only become free.